Brandon Sanderson is one of the most active and relevant authors in the fantasy storytelling scene right now. But whether you love him or not, I've recently found myself wondering something. Is he too ambitious? About a year ago, the man himself posted a video called
I have been lying to you,
where he confessed to writing 4 books in secret. He did this while regularly releasing other fantasy books that we did know about. There was a Kickstarter, it broke records, moving on. It's almost unheard of for someone to write this many books this quickly and have them be high quality, or at least be received well. But so far, according to most people, Brandon's been killing it. The first of those secret projects is out now. It's called Tress of the Emerald Sea. I read it, and again the question came up, is Brandon Sanderson too ambitious? But this time, I had a different reason for asking that. What's shakin'? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. Tress of the Emerald Sea is a standalone fantasy story set within Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, which is a connected universe of different stories set on different planets with different characters and different magic, but again, all part of the same universe. Now, you don't need to have read any of the other books or series in the Cosmere to understand Tress of the Emerald Sea, but there will be references and Easter eggs that you might enjoy more if you have read some of those other books. The story itself is about a young woman named Tress who lives on what is essentially an island of stone. An island set within an ocean of dangerous plant-like spores. The boy she loves is sent away by his callous king father and ultimately ends up as a prisoner of a sorceress on the other side of the world. From there, Tress sets out on a classic fantasy adventure to get him back, and along the way she meets a colourful cast of characters. I will say though that the story really hits its stride when it gets past the whole call to adventure part of the hero's journey circle and moves more into what it's meant to be, which is a fantastical pirate adventure. So look, I loved the story. Maybe not as much as a lot of the other reviewers on here, and I'll get to that. But I do think Tress of the Emerald Sea is an absolute standout within Brandon's long catalogue and growing catalogue of fantasy stories. It's a standout not just because it's good, but for a lot of other creative decisions that Brandon made, which I'll explain in just a bit. I want to tell you what I loved most about the story and why I think it hits such a sweet spot for so many readers, even the less diehard Sanderson fans. I finished this book and my very first thought was, is Brandon Sanderson too ambitious? Not only with how much he is writing and how much he plans to write, alongside working on a possible Mistborn adaptation, making YouTube videos, teaching writing classes, and countless other things. Not only that, but is he too ambitious for taking such a drastic leap from what is his usual style of storytelling with Tress of the Emerald Sea? It's a very different story to a lot of the other books you would have read by Brandon. Brando Sando is most well known for writing mammoth-sized fantasy series that follow 20 plus characters, all of them working against apocalyptic stakes. Tress of the Emerald Sea is not that, and that's awesome. As someone who talks to a lot of fantasy readers, I am starting to notice a growing fatigue when it comes to the more epic of epic fantasy. But that's a whole different video which I will be making. Stick around for that one. Tress of the Emerald Sea is much more adjacent to a fable or a fairy tale. Brando himself has actually said that. What that means is that the stakes are a lot smaller, and that's not a bad thing. When the stakes are smaller and also a lot more personal to the characters, it also becomes a lot more intimate. The conflict is a lot more personal because it's not just about saving the world or everyone dies. It's more, I have to save this person because I'm scared and I care about them. Tress of the Emerald Sea was refreshing because rather than Brandon's usual, style of storytelling where the whole world is at risk, we really zoom in and we get a much more personal look at the characters and their reasons for wanting to resolve the conflict of the story. When you zoom in like that, it is a lot easier to connect emotionally with the characters, especially the protagonist. In this case, Tress, which was a really good decision. I think it helped me connect a lot more with her as a character. A lot of fantasy readers are finding themselves more and more interested in the branches of the lower stakes fantasy. You may know it as cozy fantasy is one that's really popping up lately, or maybe episodic or self-contained fantasy where it follows individual adventures with smaller stakes. Readers are enjoying a lot more fantasy stories that take a step back from always being dark and edgy and gloomy and just aren't afraid to be fun, I guess. It feels weird saying that, but that's a word I can think of. Just fun. Are you one of those people that enjoy more lighthearted fantasy? I am. Dude, I don't know how Brando Sando keeps coming up with such interesting settings and magic systems. It's almost frustrating. So I mentioned before that the ocean in Tress of the Emerald Sea isn't water. It's like an ocean of plant spores, which will be a really odd visual, but bear with me. The ocean in Tress of the Emerald Sea is not wet, and you can't get it wet, which is, good news for you, being that you struggle to get things wet as it is. The sea isn't wet because it's made up of spores, a sea of emerald green spores, which is, one heck of a dynamic visual to give the readers. Now, the spores are dangerous because if they do get wet, they explode into a hostile and insatiable bloom of plant vines that will turn pretty much anyone they touch into a used tube of toothpaste. And yes, it does rain in this world. So look, Tress of the Emerald Sea is pretty good. It's a lot of what Brandon Sanderson does best. It's got dynamic characters with believable motivations. There's a great use of the found family trope, which is one of Brandon's, I'm guessing, favorite things to do, and he does it well. There's a fascinating world with very clever magic and ecosystems. And being that the intention here from Brando was to tell a lighter, funner story that can be enjoyed by a younger audience than most of his other books, you do get a lot of tropes and cliches that I imagine a lot of readers are gonna kind of roll their eyes at. However, for me personally, it never felt like these tropes were used as a lazy replacement for just being creative, but rather I felt those tropes were used more as just a way to bring the reader back to the types of fantasy stories that got us into this genre, like Del Toro Quest. But with all that said, this wasn't a 5-star read for me. I have a few small nitpicks, the smallest nitpick of which being the inclusion of a dragon in this story didn't really feel entirely necessary, or at least well executed. The thing is, you could swap the dragon out for a breakdancing troll, and honestly I don't think it would make a whole lot of difference. The character of the dragon was important, but that character being a dragon was built up way too much to just end up being little more than a quick conversation, a quick chat. When I think about, the conversation between the dragon and the characters who were talking to the dragon, I find that I've had more intense conversations with my friend's boyfriend Patrick. And Patrick sucks. So in the postscript for the book, Brando mentions that he was inspired to write Tress of the Emerald Sea after watching The Princess Bride with his wife, and his wife turned around and said that she really wished the story had followed more of the female character, having a bit more agency and being a bit more active and going out and maybe looking for the love interest rather than just sitting around and waiting. That's fine, although I have seen some people refer to that in regards to Tress of the Emerald Sea as being a subversion of the damsel in distress trope. I don't think it is. Tress of the Emerald Sea didn't really do anything wildly different to the damsel in distress trope, it just gender flipped it. This time it's a girl going out and looking for the boy rather than the other way around. And to be clear, that's fine. I am completely okay with that. I just don't think it's like a subversion of the trope. You know what I mean? I don't have an issue with tropes and cliches if they are implemented creatively. And I think they were in this story, and I think they were done with purpose. Again, maybe to nostalgically stroke the reader in a way to bring them back to the stories that really made them love fantasy. Like I said before, tropes are just tools in a tool belt, and that tool belt is being worn by some really great and unique world building. Oops, I said the W word. Sorry, Stephen. But here's my biggest issue with Tress of the Emerald Sea. I listened to the audiobook, and from the very start, the narration was completely different to the typical straightforward style of storytelling that I'm used to with Brandon, a type of storytelling that I actually really, really love. The story was told in Tress of the Emerald Sea more directly from an actual narrator to the reader, and that narration was very snarky and sarcastic and embellished with a lot of meta nods from that storyteller to the reader. And a couple of minutes in, I was like, what am I listening to? Like, did Jay Kristoff write this? I was very confused and, to be honest, a bit worried, because that's not my favorite type of tone when I'm reading a fantasy story, to say the least. But then it's revealed just a little bit later, so not a major spoiler, but minor spoiler, that the person telling the story is in fact Hoid, who we do know from other Cosmere stories. I mentioned before that there's like Easter eggs and references. This is one of them. And as soon as I heard that it was Hoid telling us this story, I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense, and I can't really say exactly why without going into much bigger spoilers about his character, but that type of sardonic meta commentary or narration could really get under a lot of readers' skin, so just a warning. I love Hoid, don't get me wrong, in fact he's one of my favorite characters in the Cosmere, like most people, but a lot of his moments in this story, like his character moments, not just as the narrator, but as an actual character in the story, a lot of his moments were cringe. I'm sorry, they were kind of cringe. Like, they just were. His eccentric nature has always been a huge part of what makes his character so interesting and what makes him so endearing. But in this story, it really seems like it was kind of dialed up to 11, and a lot of the things that his actual character said and did felt a lot like the quirky people on TikTok. Have you ever seen that, like, that SNL skit, Being Quirky or whatever it's called?
This lamp used to be an antique watering can.
And if you can believe it, this trendy necklace used to be an old badminton racket.
That's kind of the vibe I got from Hoid in this story. These were moments that were definitely intended to make us laugh, and 9 out of 10 of them I would probably nose exhale at most. In the postscript, Brando did say that he was wanting to prepare more for writing about Hoid, or from Hoid's perspective, in preparation for an eventual prequel story for Hoid, which is very exciting news if you're, a Cosmere fan. But with that said, I'm really hoping that prequel story doesn't just end up being 400 pages of the dude wearing oddly colored socks because he's not like other guys, Oh, and also the audiobook voice for Ulan was nails on a chalkboard. I don't know if a lot of people out there liked it, but I hated it. I am honest to God not even exaggerating when I say that the voice that was used for him sounded almost exactly like the yes guy from The Simpsons.
Excuse me, sir. Yes?
I get that it's a lighter, fun story intended even for a younger audience, but damn dude, chill. Is Brandon Sanderson too ambitious? Honestly, probably yeah. But so far, he's been walking the walk with his whole Brandussy out, so... Brando's been hitting home runs off the wall, so his enormous ambition might be just what he needs to really lock in his place at the top of the fantasy food chain. Anyway, that'll do it. What do you think about Brandon Sanderson's ambition? What did you think of Tress of the Emerald Sea, or are you intending to read it if you haven't already? Thank you so much for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. You are my favorite. I make lots of videos about fantasy books, so if that's your kind of thing, you should stick around. Otherwise, maybe I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.